Thank you so much, Fotini, for being here with me in the Golden Core podcast. I would love for you to start by sharing a little bit about yourself and your work with our listeners today.
Well, thank you so much, Marina, for having me here on your podcast. Yeah, just to open up just a bit about, who I am and the work that I do. I feel like, I'm a being here on this, beautiful and complex world. And I feel like I'm learning endlessly from the wisdom of women, from the earth, from, ancient memory held in the plants, medicine, and also the waters of the body. I feel like I'm very drawn to. And I feel like I walk this path guided by devotion to spirit and to the great mother in all her forms, however you choose to call her, whether it's Pachamama or Sophia or Mary or the earth herself. And also in devotion to her elemental languages, and that being the fire, the water, the air, and the soil. And I think the work and who I am, can't be summed up in one title or role. I think I'm a sister, a daughter. I care for, my gardens, my herbs and my vegetables, and my beehives at home as well, and my beloved animals. So I think, this tending that I do, it's not separate from the work that I do, but I think it is the work as well. And it's all sacred and alive. And so, I've always been drawn to mysteries and I guess to the occult and a bit of, womb wisdom and, just these liminal spaces where life and death meet. And in my work, so my background is actually social work, and I've been a social worker for almost 10 years now. And within my work, I blend traditional wisdom and grounded with hands-on care, tending to the womb space and the pelvis, and tending to this space not just like as an anatomical space, but also as a living center of power and memory. And by what I mean by traditional wisdom work with women's wombs specifically is that I think a lot of this work, its wisdom and origins have been from Indigenous roots or cultures around the world, where the West has eradicated this knowledge in its own culture due to colonization and, the oppression of women's bodies over centuries. And so, to go a little bit about into the work that I do in each modality. So I have learned Mayan abdominal womb massage, which has been passed down through Mayan traditions through the indigenous people of Central and South America. And that's, a deeply holistic practice and, one that works across, physical, emotional, and energetic planes with the womb. And so it's supportive of conditions like PCOS and endometriosis and fertility challenges and postpartum healing. And I think also, this work can really foster circulation. It relieves tension. It helps restore harmony in the reproductive and digestive systems. And the only time we don't do this work is if a woman is menstruating or if she has an IUD present. I also add or weave into my work pelvic and vaginal steaming. So, in the East Asian medicine, we have these Ren and Du meridians, which essentially is what is considered the microcosmic orbit. And it's this circuit of Jing that runs through the perineum, up the spine, and then down the crown and the front of the body. So steaming the perineum and the pelvis, we're directly working directly with nervous system medicine. So, it activates our vagus nerve, it supports parasympathetic function. And not only that, but the added benefits of the boiled medicinal herbs and how they're able to penetrate through the tissues of the pelvis and help with stagnation in that space. I also wanted to add, I do work in holistic pelvic care, who I was taught by my teacher, Tammy Lynn Kent. And so for anyone who doesn't know that, that is essentially also internal pelvic release work. And yes, through gentle intervaginal massage and fascia release, there is this direct, inseparable relationship between the pelvic health and mental health. And, the pelvis is surrounded by a vast web of nerves that feed directly into the brain. And so when we carry trauma, numbness, coldness, or stagnation in this space, which most modern women do, it can actually impact our mood, our joy, our sense of power. And so many women, we're told that normal symptoms like pain and cramps and clotting and hormonal imbalance, this pain, it's a messenger, and, it's not something for women to just endure silently or as something that is normal. And so often these signs, whether it be a tilted uterus or pelvic misalignment or numbness in the fascia or emotional grief stored in the tissues, what's rarely discussed in, I guess, mainstream systems is, overall health in the pelvic space can be supported through simple practices like uterine massage and abdominal work and warmth and herbs and nervous system regulations. When we're talking about pelvic health, I think we're not just talking about physical anatomy, but we're also talking about truth that lies in this space. And so there's no bypassing in the pelvis. I think the womb speaks in raw, unfiltered language, whether that be pain, stagnation, cysts or fibroids or irregularity. And each one is a messenger. And these aren't, random malfunctions or medical mysteries to be, medicated away. I think there are also direct communications from the body. And internal pelvic care is one of the most, I think, powerful, direct and humbling ways to do that. And, the truth is that most women don't know how to listen to their bodies because we've just never been taught how to. And I think this is also a product of our culture. And so, in this work, I guide women into dialogue with their own bodies using gentle internal touch and fascial release and breath work and deep somatic presence to unwind. And the womb holds memory. Sometimes as we're releasing tension in the pelvic floor, women will often say to me like, oh, I don't know why I'm thinking of this person, or I don't know why this memory has come up just now. They may not know, but the body always knows, and the body knows why that's coming up. And so, when we have these physical symptoms like painful periods and, frequent urination and, fertility issues, beneath those physical symptoms can often also be, emotional roots as well. And so, I guess when we're massaging the uterus or the pelvis back into alignment, we're not just shifting organs, but we're also opening a channel. And, that channel can hold grief and power and joy and birth and death within that too. And I think within that, that's why it's such a powerful space as well, because the pelvis is the place where spirit meets form. And so, I think that's also like a huge part of why I'm so interested in this work as well. And I will say I've also been studying cranial sacral therapy, which I'm soon to graduate next year as a therapist. And so, that's also a modality that sees the body as one integrated field of fluid and fascia and memory and consciousness. And it has been just such a beautiful and subtle companion to womb and pelvic work and, helping address different patterns and the breathing of the cranium in the body. And, that can go back to our very earliest imprint of life. There's a teacher in visionary craniosacral called Hugh Mill, and he says that we can't touch the head without first touching the heart, and we can't touch the heart without first touching the sacrum. And so I think that also speaks volumes as well in this line of work and also how important it can be. I also wanted to add, I do traditional postpartum care, which is also through the lens of Ayurveda. And so Ayurveda teaches that the first 40 days after birth shape the next 40 years of a woman's life. So things like warmth, oil, nourishment, rest, these aren't just luxuries, they're actually necessities for regeneration. And so I offer belly binding and abhyanga massage and womb therapy, herbal baths, meal preparation for remedies for postpartum depletion. And I think this is how we tend to the mother, the first home of every human. So postpartum is not just like a personal event. I actually think it's also like a collective imprint because what we now know from developmental psychology and early childhood research is that, a child's nervous system is not fully separate from its mother's until about 18 months or 2 years of age. So for the first 2 years of a baby's life, still experiencing the world through the mother's body. And so her state of being becomes the blueprint for the child's emotional regulation, its nervous system development. And as you know, everything can be changed as well and reconditioned as adults. But right now, I think this type of work is really essential, especially in Australia alone. Like 1 in 3 women will experience birth trauma in their lifetime, and, 1 in 10 uh, experience obstetric violence. And so I think when we're tending to the mother, we're not just supporting one person, but we're also laying the foundation for an entire human life. And yeah, in addition to that, I also offer closing of the bones. As you would know, that's where me and you met 2 years ago at Naoli Viniva's workshop. And so, yeah, I've learned closing of the bones from Naoli Viniva and also from the Indigenous midwives in Guatemala who I went and learned from. And yeah, this is a cross-cultural, sacred ritual to honor life's thresholds. And so that could be something from birth, miscarriage, abortion, weaning, menopause, even a death of a loved one. And so, yeah, using rebozos, which are long ceremonial shawls, I gently rock, bind, and hold the body and wrapping it in safety and presence. And yeah, this practice helps a woman call her energy back and close what has opened. And yeah, it also helps with integrating the emotional, physical, and spiritual dimensions of transition. And yeah, I think each one of these therapies is not separate from the other. I think they're all expressions of one deep truth, which is that when we're tending to the womb, we're tending to the roots of humanity and we're tending to, yeah, the original home. And so when women revere their bodies, we're also reminded of the silencing of women's bodies for centuries. And yeah, I think this is also what has caused the outcomes of what we see today in women's health and pelvic health specifically.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing such wealth of knowledge, and I can feel your passion for this work as well. I have so many questions. I had a list of questions and now I have a lot more questions.
Yeah, ask away or,
Awesome.
write them to me. Yeah.
Oh, so beautiful. I just love how holistic the work you offer is, and how much you honor the woman, as you said, and the womb as the home and this microcosmos. I think you used that word earlier on. Yeah, this universe where, as you said, the earth and the divine meet. Yeah, it's so precious. Thank you for sharing. So beautiful. I had internal pelvic work in between, so when just before the birth of my second child, and it was so incredibly supportive to
Mhm.
me. I can't even, yeah, it's a work that it's, I feel, just starting to become more available to women and to people with wombs. And it's essential, as you said. There are, yeah, it's necessity, to have access to those practices and to this care as well in the postpartum window. Choose. Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
important, the work that you do. Oh, beautiful. I would love to move a little bit more and, start to investigate with
Mhm.
curiosity a little bit more about who you are and your essence, and share a little bit more about that. Could you please share a little bit about your connection to your lineage, perhaps? I just wonder if there
Mm.
is a link between the work that you do now and your roots, your maternal, paternal roots. I'd love, yeah, for you to share if what you do now has been shaped by where you come from, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think undeniably, the work I now do and tending to wombs for me feels like tending to memories as well. And, it's tending to the places where a lot of our identity is born. And so, yeah, undeniably, I think my lineage and my ancestry has impacted me for sure in the work that I do. And so, yeah, I think my connection to lineage, it's not something that's conceptual. It's something that's like very visceral. Like I really feel it, in my blood and in my bones. And yeah, I come from a lineage of powerful, resilient women and women who have carried deep complexity as well. So I will mention my paternal lineage is rooted in a small little city called Agrinio, which is a city in western mainland Greece in the Peloponnese. And yeah, I know from my paternal lineage, they were always rooted in those lands and in those mountains. And they were farmers and farming the land for tobacco and for root vegetables and fruits. And I think that has highly impacted me in how I connect with the land, and also, yeah, my also love for gardening and for beekeeping as well. I will mention though my maternal lineage has, carried a lot more of a turbulent story, and, one that has been marked by migration and survival. And so my ancestors, my maternal ancestors, they were Indigenous Greeks who lived for thousands of years in what we now know as modern day Turkey. So they were people of the Anatolian and Pontian regions. So they were deeply rooted in place and in their language. And so, yeah, under Ottoman rule, the Greeks were slowly pushed out of their homelands over centuries. And so their language and their faith was banned in many areas. So my great grandmother, she learned Greek in secrecy from private teachers in her home. And yeah, I think eventually during that Anatolian and Pontian genocide, which happened around 1920. This was also when this was happening with the Armenian genocide as well. Yeah, my foremothers were forced to flee their lands, and so they left behind their homeland, Constantinople, which is now known as Istanbul, and they were also residing in Ankara. And yeah, they found refuge on the Aegean island of Lesbos. And yeah, I think that exile and that grief really lingered in them and also in me as well. And I think that pain of, unprocessed and unspoken grief was passed down in some way. And I think that truly awakened in me when I began this work. And so my grandmother, my yaya, yaya is grandmother in Greek, Mary, she was born on the island of Lesbos after her family had fled Anatolia. And yeah, her mother, so my great grandmother, she was widowed at the age of 29 with 5 children. And yeah, my grandmother was raised with the help of her grandmother. And so the presence of the elder woman and the grandmother was always there. And it became, I think, a sacred pattern. So even though amidst hardship and survival, there was always a woman that was like holding the line. And so in 1962, yeah, my grandmother, she left Greece with my grandfather, and she was 24 years old and she was pregnant with my mother. And so she had 2 sons under the age of 6, and they sailed 7 weeks to Australia, a place unknown, a culture that was completely unfamiliar, but they came here in hope for a better life. So yeah, soon after arriving in Melbourne, my grandmother gave birth to my mother. And so with no money, with no support, and obviously a family to feed, my grandmother handed her newborn, my mother, to a Greek caretaker, one of many women who was caring for the babies of newly arrived migrants in Melbourne. And so, yeah, at 40 days postpartum, my grandmother returned to work in the factories. And so years later, my mother also did the same. And so when I was born, my mother became very ill. And so after about a month, she had a hysterectomy. And at 40 days, I was placed into the arms of my yaya, my grandmother, who raised me until I was about 15 years old. And so this also was the beginning of my mother's story as well, because this is when she started to experience domestic violence within her marriage. And so it was, yeah, it was more appropriate for me to be living with my grandparents at the time. And so, yeah, I think this red thread that we know of, and Jane Hardwick Collins, she teaches a lot about this work. It's that, it's this living line that runs through the wombs of our matrilineal ancestors. And yeah, it's this unbroken thread of memory with emotion, wisdom, and wounds as well. And it not only carries the pain that was never processed, but it also carries the strength, the devotion, and the spiritual inheritance that came before us. And so even though my matrilineal line was marked with, displacement and separation, it was also marked by deep love, and it was marked by grandmothers who stepped in when mothers couldn't do it for themselves. And it was, yeah, marked by women who kept holding the line even when things were fracturing around them. And so I think that displacement, the loss of homeland, the ache for belonging, I think that's always echoed in my body, even though I was born here in Australia. And I feel like the Southern Hemisphere is so different to the Northern Hemisphere, and Australia itself is its own, like, unique, potent land that I feel like I haven't felt anywhere else in the world. And so, yeah, I've always felt it in my bones and in my blood. And I think I've felt the longing as well of my father, who, he left Greece when he was 25 and he came to Australia by himself. And yeah, just again feeling this unprocessed grief as well from my grandmother and my mother, who have also had hysterectomies. And so, yeah, I think the journey of womb work, I began to understand that, the red thread, it's not a concept, but it's this living inheritance as well that we have. And I uncovered these imprints held in my body and, the stories of loss and deep yearning. And I began to give my womb permission to feel what my mother and my grandmother and her mothers couldn't. And so reconnecting with my womb became a return. It became like a homecoming. It grounded me in my own body. It landed, and also like in the lands as well that hold me, and the rhythms in my cycle, because the cycles for us as women, they're our first blueprint. It's our sacred design before any story of rupture was ever written. And so, yeah, I think to tend to the womb and also protecting the postpartum threshold is my way of also like mending this thread as well. And yeah, in modern life, especially for women born into systems shaped by colonization and patriarchy and constant survival, we've been deeply disconnected from our wombs. And, we've been conditioned to normalize what is not normal, especially like debilitating menstrual pain and shame around our cycles, and, the silence around miscarriage and abortion as well. And yeah, I think these aren't individual failings, or this isn't just, like my own individual story, but I think these are all symptoms of a collective loss. So when women are placed in environments of constant survival through displacement and through war and through genocide and, systematic oppression, we are often conditioned to disconnect from the most innate parts of ourselves. And so we learn to override our bodies and survive rather than feel. And I think, before colonization, when there were more matriarchal cultures, women tended to these parts of themselves together in community. So tending to the womb, I think, is not just healing. I think it's also resistance, because it's a return to the wisdom that lives in our bodies. And it's, yeah, tending to this invisible thread that links us back to ourselves and also to the people that came before us, our ancestors. And so, yeah, for me to be separated by my mother so early on at 40 days and to absorb her grief and her illness and her loss, I think that wired something in me. And I think, yet that very wound became a compass for me as well. And though, like much of my professional learning has come from more like Eastern traditions and, Mayan midwifery traditions. I think my heart has always also been magnetized to the stories of the land of my ancestors and where they come from. And I don't know if you've been to Greece, but, Greece holds a deep current of, feminine reverence. And long before temples, were turned into churches, they were temples that were revering the feminine. And I grew up in a very religious household. There were icons of Christ and the Virgin Mary on every wall. And as I got older, I began to remember that before Mary, there was Dimitra, the goddess of harvest and the mother of seasons. And then there was Persephone, which was the maiden queen who descended into the underworld. And, there was Athena, who was wise and sovereign. I think these weren't just myths to me, but they were also archetypes and they were mirrors as well. And I think so many women like myself, we're rediscovering these stories and reading and remembering and weaving them back into their lives. And I think it's because, yeah, these women, these goddesses, they were midwives, they were herbalists, they were oracles, and the priestesses of Delphi, they were like medicine women. They were keepers of the sacred and they were the feminine face of divinity before the church came in and restructured the story. And I will say, like, even with that restructuring, I think the sacred feminine never really disappeared. And I think, when you do go to Greece, you can still feel her everywhere. And, she's in shrines and churches, and there's icons of Panagia, which is, the Virgin Mary. And I would say, like, she's perhaps the most loved and called upon figure in the Greek culture. And so, like, growing up with my grandmother, she was devoted to her. Like, every morning she would light her candle and say her prayers at her altar. She cleansed the house morning and night. She would smoke the house with frankincense and myrrh. And through my grandmother, I absorbed a form of spirituality that was not institutional, but it was also quite intimate. And, my yaya taught me that prayer could be woven into anything, like cooking, tending to the garden. Like, I would always hear her just like silently praying during the day, completing just mundane tasks, often talking to Panagia. And so, yeah, even though I was raised in this religious household, I feel like the feminine never really left me and she just came in different forms and shapes. And I will mention also, I think that lineage and ancestry, it's not just about our human ancestors, but I think lineage lives in the land and in the bees and the birds and the plants. And, I was born and raised on Wurundjeri country, which is unceded land. And I honor also the place that I come from as well. And I think that this is not just my story, but I think this is about all of us as well, because the rupture that we feel today is not just a couple of centuries old. I think it's thousands. And the colonization of land was preceded by the colonization of the body. And so the burning of witches, the systematic destruction of Indigenous feminine knowledge, like the temples of Delphi, the midwives, the oracle women, the First Nations people here, this was silence. And so I think we live in the grief of what was taken, and to grieve together again, I think, is to heal, and to gather in circle is to reclaim. And so I think to name the wound is to open the way for medicine as well. And so I think that's what this work is. It's root work, it's womb work, and it's about remembering, the sacred design of womanhood, not just as a burden, but as a blueprint as well.
Won't you take a moment to hold your words and your story with deep reverence? So much love.
Thank you.
I can feel your red thread being so
Uh,
vibrant and alive. And it's just running through, your lineage and on you and just reverberating through the work that you do. And yeah, it's just so healing. I feel like it's revolutionary, the work that you do. Such a cycle break as well for your mother, for your grandmother,
yeah.
Mary.
Yeah.
You could almost feel her presence when you're describing her
Yeah.
cleansing the room. I could just see her walking around and
Yeah.
gosh, so beautiful
Yeah.
to witness.
She is still alive. She's still
Oh,
here with us. She's 94.
that's
Yeah, she lives at home, still cooks and cleans independently. Yeah, I feel very, very privileged to have, I think it's a very unique experience to, yeah, be born through your mother, but then to actually have like a second mother, raise you completely throughout your whole childhood till your teenage years. Yeah, I feel like I've been gifted with two mothers in this lifetime.
have that the wisdom of an elder, just being in that is so beautiful. Such a privilege. And, oh, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Sorry, I want to go a different way with my questions as well. Yeah. We've spoken about this disconnection, this displacement, this lack of belonging, and how we carry those stories in our womb. It's generational. The
Mm.
trauma and the wounds come especially through our maternal lineage. Are there any stories or anything you'd like to share from your own journey that have perhaps disconnected you from the truth of who you are from your heart, something that is your story that you feel was a perhaps pivotal moment, that point of disconnection that changed it all and that flipped your story into one of healing and of living, an aligned life,
Yeah.
a life in alignment with your essence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, the disconnection, I think from my true essence, it didn't begin in, a single moment in time. I think it began quietly. And, again, as we spoke of, through this inherited silence and unspoken grief and unprocessed lineage. And so, yeah, I was born, into a culture of contradictions. I was raised in the Greek Orthodox Church, and as beautiful and traditional it can be, it does have a lot of restrictions as well. And so I was told that, bleeding made me unclean and, I wasn't allowed to take Holy Communion or kiss icons if I was on my bleed. Yeah, I think no one reflected the sacredness of my body back to me. And so I think parts of me began to dim and disappear as, a young girl that's, getting used to her body and coming into her first menarche. And yeah, I think, that rupture as well became early on. As I mentioned, I was separated from my mother just 40 days after birth. And so yeah, I think I never knew a woman in my lineage who wasn't in some way a martyr. My mother raised three children alone without the support of her husband. And yeah, she was supported by my grandparents. And so I think I didn't realize as well how much I was reenacting the same story. I was suppressing my needs and severing from my body and also living in survival. And so, yeah, I left my voice, I left my intuition. I began to live from the mind, from reason and from logic. And, whilst those tools served me in some ways, they also really pulled me far from myself. So, I became the good girl, the people pleaser, the really high achiever. I think that thread and that pattern, I don't think it's the whole story, but I think it's also the place I began to find my path and being of service into the world. And so, yeah, I entered the field of social work when I was 18. So I studied a Bachelor of Social Work and a Bachelor of Sociology, majoring in gender studies and criminology. And yeah, I think I've spent nearly a decade in service. And, I worked across many different areas as a social worker. And it's interesting when I actually look back at those times, I now see how the themes of womb and birth and death and sexuality were just like all present in the roles that I was doing. And like, one of my earliest roles, I was at a sexual assault center doing advocacy and research at Monash Health. And we were focusing on trauma-informed care, educating healthcare providers on how to support victims of sexual assault during medical and dental appointments. And I was delivering sex education programs to teenagers in high schools. And then from there, I moved into more like hospital-based social work, and I supported women in the mother and baby wards, which were for marginalized women who were birthing alone most of the time. And so, yeah, within that as well, I spent time in pediatric oncology where I was working with newborns who were facing their cancer diagnoses and receiving chemotherapy treatment in the hospital, and often moving through palliative care as well. And yeah, and then later I transitioned into aged care, and I was supporting people through often their final stages of life. And so now looking back, long before I called myself a doula, I think I was already walking with people through life's most like sacred initiations. And so yeah, I think the pivotal moment for me of reconnection and reconnecting back to my essence came through in 2019. And so I began exploring somatic healing and breathwork and cyclical living and womb wisdom. And I went overseas and I did my yoga 200-hour training. And I think I did this not to become a practitioner initially, but I was just wanting to understand myself better. And I had an interest in these fields. And yeah, I followed this quiet pull towards like tantric philosophies and Ayurveda and herbal medicine. And yeah, it didn't come until about 2021 during the pandemic. I was diagnosed with endometriosis. And I think, yeah, after years of very painful and irregular cycles, my body finally spoke in a way that I just couldn't ignore anymore. And so, yeah, under the medical system, I was only offered a band-aid solution. I was either given the option of going on the contraceptive pill and stopping my period altogether, or having surgery. And I thought like, this wasn't just a health issue. I think this was a test and an initiation for me. And so it was more like, could I be my own prodigy and embody the teachings I had just been learning over the last 2 years? And so, yeah, I began applying everything I had been studying. So like uterine massage and pelvic steaming and nervous system repair and cyclical rest and nourishment. And over time, my womb began to heal and the pain began to dissolve, and the scans later showed almost complete reversal of all the tissue and growth in my womb. And yeah, so I think my story with my struggles with my womb health, and also just my story as well of, how my essence or my light may have dimmed throughout my life. I think this is, again, it's cultural and it's deeply embodied in how we are taught to relate to our bodies with silence and suppression. And, it's no wonder, wow, now like almost 20% of women in Australia have an endometriosis diagnosis. And, 90% of women have painful or irregular periods, which result in them needing to, miss work or school because of their symptoms. And again, I feel that this rupture again is mirrored in our safety too. And I think what I also grew up with, the complexities of what the challenges that my mum went through as well with her safety. And I remember reading recently in headlines in Australian reports that, 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence in their home here in Australia. And we've had the highest records of intimate homicide violence this year alone. And so, yeah, I think this isn't an isolated wound. I think it's a reflection of how the feminine has been devalued and repressed and misunderstood on both a micro and a macro level. And so, yeah, I think these were all pivotal points of my essence being dimmed, but then also pivotal moments of returning and reclaiming my body outside of the system as well, and through more traditional wise woman ways of working with pelvic health. And so, yeah, I felt very inspired during this time. I felt very lucky to have known about this work, prior to my diagnosis. And so ways of also supporting myself as I needed. However, for most women at the time, maybe the pill or surgery is the only option that they have. And so my social justice and social worker brain was like, wait a second, if this is my experience, then other women need to know about this too. And yeah, I think that was such a big time for me, especially during the pandemic. I had lost my job during the mandates. And so that also meant that I had lost everything I had built, my job, my income, my ability to work. And I think the two initiations were being mirrored back to me as well. Both my health journey and my career as well. I was being asked, can you trust yourself? Can you choose sovereignty over safety? And can you honor truth? And for me to root back into what is innately wise was being mirrored to me. And so, today my work lives at this intersection of, sacred practice, but also social work and social understanding and advocacy for the feminine body and spirit. And I think it's amazing how life can also turn around when you trust your higher self and your instincts as well. And I think the other part of your question was living in deep presence and alignment with myself. Yeah, I guess through that experience and also my womb health journey, I feel like living in a place of deep presence and alignment. I don't think it's a final state I've arrived at. I think it's a rhythm that I keep returning to over and over again. And it's a remembering. I think, yeah, presence isn't something that I've learned through books or through teachings. I think it's something that my body has taught me. And it's taught me in pauses, in the death of my cycle every month. And yeah, I think it's something that I continue to rediscover each time I choose to slow down, each time I remember to breathe into my belly and ground into my feet. And, I guess, yeah, for much of my early life, I lived from my head. I was overdoing, overriding. I wasn't taught to live from my body. I wasn't taught that my body was wise or trustworthy. And so yeah, I was taught to mistrust its signals and to silence its needs. And, my worth was how productive or pleasing I could be. But yeah, over time, I think through practice as well, I've returned slowly and gently, and I've come back to my own inner ground and back to my body and back to the earth. And I think, yeah, what I've come to realize through, I guess, this deep presence and alignment is that the way we relate to the land is the way we relate to ourselves. And so when we treat the earth as a resource to be extracted from, we begin to treat our own bodies the same way and, pushing past exhaustion and disconnecting from our cycles. And so I think, yeah, when we forget the sacredness of the land, we forget the sacredness of our own inner landscape. And so the earth for me as well has been a big mirror and a big teacher. And I think living in alignment for me, it's about relationship. It's about being in honest relationship with what's true and what's around me and beyond me. And yeah, I think it's a continual softening into receptivity and trust, and that alignment is not something that's rigid. I think it's very fluid and it's very feminine and it's always changing and it's always alive. And yeah, I think that's also the reason why I named my business Inner Soma. And I think it's this returning to the innate intelligence of the soma, the living sensing being and body. And yeah, the word innate reminds me that so much of what I'm seeking is already here, inherent within me. And soma, the Greek word for the body, it's also this word that encompasses our sacred vessel of memory, of emotion and intuition. And so yeah, to live aligned for me is to be in reverence to my body, to the seasons. And, every morning I get up and I go out into my garden and I'm sipping on my matcha latte, which I've been enjoying lately. And yeah, I've just come to love greeting my bees in the morning and watching them all come out of the hive and, checking the plants and noticing what's budding and what's blooming and what's fading. And yeah, I think for me, like confidence, it's not a loud thing. I'm not a very like loud or exuberant person. I think for me, confidence is being rooted. And yeah, I don't think it's always about being certain. It's about being in right relationship with our bodies and with the earth. And so, yeah, I think, yeah, when I light the candle, when I touch the soil, when I'm bleeding or when I'm resting, I'm in a state of ceremony. And this is the living prayer. And for me, this is what presence and alignment and confidence means to me. And I guess, yeah, it's not something I'm striving for, but it's something that I'm continuing to return to all the time.
Beautiful. Just receiving the depth of your embodiment. It's
Mm.
out. I can feel it in my body. It's
My voice is like shaking. I'm like, "Oh, I've never said this before to any, or like maybe my closest girlfriends, but I've never spoken out like this." And so my voice is like shaking as well. I don't know if it's coming through.
it is such a privilege to me to hold this space for you. I'm feeling a combination of emotion and excitement. Like I've been teary for most of this
Oh,
interview. Just having a little cry now. It's so empowering just being in your presence. You carry such wisdom, and it's a wisdom that is running through your veins. It's like it's so alive, the word alive and vibrant. And as you said, it's not loud, it just is rooted and so powerful. I can just feel it. I'm wearing red and I've got these huge earrings on, and now I understand. I'm here to just honor you and yeah, just your story and where you've been and where you're heading. It's just an honor, like to have witnessed you, just you as you are in essence. Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be in your presence. I just want to learn more and wow, it's
let's do another podcast.
part two. Oh, I would love for you to share how our listeners can connect with you. I would love for more women to have access to the beautiful work that you do. And if there are any upcoming offerings as well that you'd like to share, please do. And I'll be sharing in our episode notes the link to your Instagram page and website as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, if you'd like to receive a treatment or yeah, sit in circle with me. I work across Melbourne at the moment and primarily from my studio space in the southeastern suburbs. And so I also offer mobile services as well, especially for postpartum services. But yeah, I can service essentially all the way from the Mornington Peninsula down to the southeast and also northern suburbs as well. Yeah, for now, the best way to connect with me is through Instagram. So it's innersoma, or you can email me directly at innersoma@proton.me. Yeah, going through as we all are going through many life transitions, and my website is currently under construction. But yeah, always open for private bookings and open via email and social media. Yeah, I continue to offer one-on-one work, so weaving together body work, somatic practices, wound massage, internal pelvic care, and nervous system support. And I'm also interweaving cranial sacral therapy into my sessions. And yeah, I'm really excited to graduate from my formal training early next year from my teacher in Northern Rivers. And so, yeah, also offering, closing of the bone ceremonies and postpartum care. And, just recently I held a closing of the bones that reminded me why we do this work. And, the mother wanted her closest sisters, best friends, cousins, siblings. I think there was about 10 of us there that day. So it became like an immersive day of just ritual and nourishment. And, mum received her 2-hour bodywork session in the morning, and then her guests started arriving at around midday, and they brought plates of food and baked goods and
That's
tea and
good.
cacao, and we just spent the whole day eating and just sharing together and sitting together in sisterhood. And then, after that, we opened meditation and circle, and we bathed mum in flowers and medicinal herbs. And then, we sent prayers into her body and wrapped her clothes with the rebozo. And she was, witnessed in love by her closest women in her life. And so, yeah, that day wasn't just about her. I think it was also about all of us being
Wow.
reminded, that mothers shouldn't have to heal in isolation, and, each woman is there. And I think, yeah, every woman, regardless whether she's birthed or not, she holds a creative portal. And, maidens, mothers, elders, we're all a part of this web, and coming in together in these ceremonial ways really revives something ancient in us. And so for me, that was my first time that I ever held a group of 10 women. So for a closing of the bones. And so that was also really exciting because I've only ever done it in more intimate spaces. And so, yeah, also opening it up to do groups of women and having it as a whole immersive day experience as well. As I mentioned also, I work as an independent social worker, and I've been working privately with clients who are on the NDIS, and I'm beginning to bridge my two worlds together. And I'm currently dreaming into a project where, working around menstrual, hormonal, and pelvic health for women with neurocognitive or who are neurodivergent. And so, more specifically, women with ADHD and autism. And through working in this field for the last year and a half, it's really showed me how complex these women's experiences can be, and being neurodivergent and also navigating their pelvic health. And I think it's a really underserved area. And so I really would love to bridge those two worlds together. And yeah, at the moment, yeah, continuing cranial sacral work as well, which hopefully I can offer as a standalone modality at the start of next year.
Exciting. Beautiful. Thank you so much. It's been lovely having you in the podcast today.
Thank you.